help to start automate the process behind making these kinds of decisions consistent, because right now it's completely arbitrary. It's based on sort of the way the tester feels that day or what they think about the application. I want to make this more concrete. The whole idea behind this is get the business that we work for, because quite frankly, you know, if we could stop existing as information security if we don't have a purpose in the company, right? Our purpose is to decrease risk. If we can't adequately identify where the risk is and we're just running around screaming that the sky is falling, we don't exist for very long. Or at least we're not very credible anymore. So the idea is to standardize, formalize, and I mean, you're right? Yeah. Absolutely. So the idea is to standardize, formalize this stuff so I can get the same answer that you can, and you guys can when we test the same app. Consistency, what a novel idea.
Yeah, I'm good with this.
So does this make sense?
Okay.
So we're, detecting dangerous information flows through the application. I think that last point, I'm going to hit one more thing on here. If you've got a page, for example, if you've got a page flow that management has that. You guys ever run into this where you've got an app that the clients log into the same page as the admins do on the same screen? Don't you just want to slap the guy that wrote that, or gal? But I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're trying to figure out here, right? If they happen to be different, like logic would tell you they should be treated differently, they should be looked at different.
Well, it would be worth your time to sit there and be like, okay, well, I've got this graph, right, and I know the login page has these properties. It would be worth your time to go ahead and up front be like, all right, you know, this is an area where we need to, you know, rate vulnerabilities higher, or this is an area where we care about more specifically SQL injections connected to this special database. And you know, it's worth your time to sit down and do that sort of stuff, because once you let the scanner kind of go, it's going to be a lot more information about how to attack it, how closely to attack it, right? It's not just threat analysis, it's also, maybe I want to spend more time on this area with different variations, you know? So
it's an interesting idea. I wanted to build on that. The biggest enemy of security testers in most organizations is what? Somebody says PCI. No, I think it's time. All right. App dev cycles, whether if you're doing traditional waterfall, the average app dev cycle is about 6 months between releases, which means that development happens for about 5 months. QA gets it for about 5-6 days, and security finds out about it the Friday before it goes live on Sunday morning.
The day after.
Or the day after. Okay.
You can test it in production, right? It's good. It's better that way.
I love testing things in production. So the idea is, if you have 24 hours and 2.5 million lines of functional code to go test, how the hell do you know what to go test? I mean, sure, you can point a scanner at it and say, go. But is it focusing on the areas that are most important? That's what this is.
Yeah. And it's not that the security guys have to go do this, right? The QA guys can say, oh, this is where the credit cards are, and then they can give you some information being like, look, this is, you know, you've got 2 hours. What do I want to focus on? Well, if I have some kind of diagram where I can figure this out, this is what we're talking about.
Does that make sense, you guys?
Are you still doing it like manually in terms of like identifying parts?
Well, that's what we're going to try to do. Like the idea here.
That's our radical thing. What we're saying is we're going to need some people to. We're not going to automatically figure all this out. We might be able to do some of it, but as we've seen, there's a lot of noise that's created. And what we want to do is kind of step back from the noise and say, okay, how can we, you know, help people out a little bit better?
So this is the idea that we're presenting. We're going to take this in steps and trying to make this into some automation that actually turns it. Well, I mean, first we have to convince you guys this is what we want to do, right? Because otherwise it becomes a typical Google product where it's a solution without a problem. So the idea of coverage analysis.
Yeah. So I mean, we were talking about this before, right? So the QA guys know what they're covering, and you know, security guys are like, well, you know, I did some testing and I think I've covered most of it, right? So if I actually have a diagram that was automatically, you know, created, or however we create these, basically, you know, you're able to say, I covered all of these flows, or my scanner covered all of these flows, and if I give you some scanning product and they're just like, okay, you know, I've got this diagram and I've got my scanner did all of its stuff. Now tell me, scanner, you know, how did I do on this diagram that I have here? Do I know that I covered this state over here, this state over here, because I know that those are important for whatever reason? And you should be able to say, okay, yes, I got to that state, I made these requests that were required for me to make, and I can actually measure how well I covered a web application.
Measured testing is ridiculously important. Being able to tell somebody how much of the app was tested, right? Do we need automation? Yes, we do. It's a foregone conclusion. That's an argument I think that's now been put to rest, right? Apps get more complex. I said this about 7 times today. Apps get more complex. As a human being, you can no longer test these on your own. Fine.
And the other thing that's important is not that it just covered that page, right? It's that it got to that page correctly. With the right amount, with the right data, and the right path. I mean, that's critical that it does that. Because I can just request pages all day long, but if I'm getting denied every time, that's silly, right?
Application behavior is an important thing. So we're trying to say, okay, if you get this question of how much of the application was tested, right? The recent QA conferences and QA groups are so much more taken seriously, quite frankly, in large organizations and security testers, is because they can answer some of these questions, right? Did a ton of interviews with people at these different non-security conferences. All of them are like, yeah, I can tell you exactly what we tested, how we tested it. I can tell you that I ran this iteration cycle against this workflow 150 times. I got the same results every time. Each of them varied between 7 seconds and 8 seconds to go through completely. How'd you guys do? Well, I tested the app. I found some cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. I go, great, well, how much of the app did that cover? Bless you. The answer is, I found a vulnerability over here, right?
Look over here, look over here.
Right. We're not answering these questions. It's not credible testing. And I know a lot of the time, security tends to be we're anti-testing. Right? We're testing everything but the logic that we're expecting. And that's fine. But when you can't get to 90% of the application to test it, you're leaving 90% of the attack surface untested. That's a scary proposition. That number used to be about 15 to 20%. It is growing every day. Every time another crazy new, Ajax framework or client-side vulnerability, or every time Adobe updates, that attack surface increases and that gap widens. So being able to say the scanner covered 8 of the 10 flows that are in the application, right? We need to find out why it didn't cover the other 4. Oh wait, it was missing the data. What a novel idea.
So, this kind of dovetails into that nicely, right? So, if I'm a security guy and I'm thinking, okay, well, I found a cross-scripting vulnerability on this page, but I need to tell people how to actually get there. I've got to log in, I've got to click on this other button, and then I need to, cause some kind of, 404 error, and then I need to attack this parameter or something like that. Sure, you can write down the final request, but it may not actually work that way, right? You got to give them necessarily a series of requests you need to do, and one of the most painful things in writing the reports that pen testers do is that they've got to, okay, I've got the content about what this vulnerability is, and that's a pain in the ass. But then I need to tell people how to reproduce this. I need to tell people, oh, by the way, you need to do this, 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 and this, and this is the scenario in which it's reproducible because this is how you score like your CDSS and stuff like that. So, if we had a diagram on how to get through the application and you're able to just put a red dot on it and just like go there, that's how you get to this vulnerability. That's just kind of like it's like a wet dream for a lot of QA guys when you're a developer, right? The security guy says, okay, here's a vulnerability, and I'm going to spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes trying to tell you why it's a vulnerability and where it is. If you can just tell them where it is and it's going to just go execute, that's you've saved 20 minutes there, not having to talk to the developer.
Right. Where's my web app pen testers in the room? We got a couple of you. Okay. So tell me if you've ever had this problem. You find a bug, and you print up a report, or you write up a report, and you hand it over to some, whether you do it as a consultant or in-house, you hand it over to some development team or some manager or something, and they go, yeah, that's not really there. Anybody? Ever? Right, where the developer knows better than you.
How much time do we spend trying to convince them that's a real thing?
Right, how much time do we spend convincing them that this happens? Even worse, what if they try it and it actually doesn't work? The rest of your report just became completely invalid, right? Oh, well, the rest of this stuff must be crap too. But here's the catch. This is why it doesn't work for you, because you didn't type this in, you didn't go through the form properly. Right? The reason this, you didn't find the vulnerability on the confirm ACH transfer pages, you didn't start at the start transfer page. You didn't do something along the way. You can't get there from